Melissa on the skateboard.
That's not slow!
I know. Hello YouTubers. After my previous videos where I come up with a set of modifications for improving a Chinese clone longboard, this is my final design. These are the modifications I chose for my board. The first thing to note is that I have a single motor configuration. This isn't actually a modification, it's a choice. The modification would have been to have two motors in a push-pull configuration, but I don't need that. The area I live in is fairly flat and one motor will do the trick. Other advantages are that I get increased range, it's lighter, and it coasts better. The drag from a single belt and motor is significantly less than from two. The other obvious modification is the open battery compartment. I went with this mainly because I like the idea of carrying another battery in my backpack and simply slotting it in and thereby doubling my range. Also, by doing this I expose the terminals which allow for off-board charging. I also went with the larger wheels in my previous video, the 97mm ones. These are good. They give me a much smoother ride than the standard Chinese clone wheels. I'm much more confident using these. In fact, when I use my Metro board, which have the same size wheels, I get the same sense of confidence going over rough terrain that I do now on the Chinese clone. I don't have it on my boosted board. Small curbs and rough terrain, a bit of a pain on that. I'll go along a road at a fair old speed and see something ahead and grit my teeth and think hopefully I'll get through this okay. With the Metro board and with these wheels on this board, I'm much more confident. From previous videos, you know I try to, if not make it waterproof, try to increase the splash proofedness, if that's a word, of the case here with some foam tape. I've kept that, I do like that. I've also used some waterproof see-through tape for the hole here and the battery monitor here, more of which later, because I wanted to see through the hole. When I turn the board on, I'll get visual cues from the lights inside, which is handy, and I just like the idea of the tape making the battery monitor completely waterproof, well, splash proof. Alright, let's open this up and see inside. The first thing to note is the speed controller I went with was the Vesk. No surprises there. It's an extremely good speed controller, purpose made for electric boards. It handles the increased wheel size very well and does standing starts, hill starts, accelerates perfectly, brakes perfectly, so that's the one that I chose. One thing to note is that I use some heat sinks on the FETs. I cut the heat shrink away from the FETs and exposed them, and I used some thermal heat glue and stuck these heat sinks on. I might remove those because they're not mechanically attached, they're only attached with glue. So some simple aluminium bar here and here with holes drilled through with a nut and bolt, squeezing the two bars together will be preferable to this, but this will do for now. I'm not entirely sure I need to do this. Like I say, this never really got warm when I was experimenting with it before, but it was in the open. This is, as you can see, covered, and I'd rather err on the side of safety. Something you know from previous videos is that I remove the BMS and use it for off-board charging. Well, I stuck with that. I did put it in a simple plastic box just to stop anything from dropping on the PCB and shorting anything out. Those plugs there simply go into these here on the battery and perform off-board charging, and that goes into the power supply. So as an off-board charger, it does the trick. Why didn't I leave that on board? If I use the original speed controller, I tend to go through these and blow them. The speed controller and the BMS try to throttle the current to the motor from the battery, and for some reason this will blow using the original speed controller. However, with the VESC, if you limit the current, in my case to 60 amps, I suspect that this won't blow. I don't know for sure, but I have a strong suspicion that's the case. With the Alien speed controller, also in a previous video, you can't limit the current on that, so I don't know if this will blow with that or not. And I also fitted that battery monitor I've seen in a previous video. You just wire it in parallel to the main leads, the main power leads, after the power switch. And let me just turn that over. If you can see that, 98%. The lights will go out, and you just press that button there, and it goes again. I did try to use some nuts and bolts here, but they're too near to the PCB for comfort. I didn't want any shorts, so I just used some zip ties, and they seem to do the trick. And just for a giggle, I fitted a tile Bluetooth tracker onto the board. If you don't know about these things, it means you can track certain devices from your phone. I put one in my wallet, one in the car, and one on this board. I don't know how useful they're going to be, but I'll play around with it, see what I think. I will say this, the amount of times that I've parked my car and forgotten where I've parked it, or my girlfriend's parked it and I don't know where she's parked it, I simply get out my phone, look on the map, and I know where it is. So that's my finished Chinese clone longboard, and I think a resounding success. If you remember, I tried to modify the Chinese clone board using as many stock parts as possible and trying to keep it as cheap as possible. Well, the only non-stock parts in here are the wheels, the speed controller, and the battery monitor, and not all of those are essential. So in order of preference for the modifications I've come up with so far, the first will be removing the speed controller. The stock Chinese clone speed controller is it's rubbish, it sucks. So I'd throw that and or use it until it blows and substitute it with either a VESC or an Alien speed controller. The VESC is more expensive, but you get a whole lot of different options to configure to make it suit you, and you can limit the current, which means I think you could leave the BMS on board. With the Alien speed controller, there's no way to limit the current, so I think you'd have to remove the BMS and use it just for off-board charging. That one modification, taking out the stock speed controller and putting in a VESC, or putting in an Alien speed controller and removing the BMS, will effectively fix the Chinese clone board. Those two issues of the speed controller and BMS blowing are sorted. So after that, the choices are down to you really, because you fixed the board. The first thing I'd consider will be fitting larger wheels. They make the ride much more confident. You're not gritting your teeth quite so much going over various cracks and stuff. After that, the battery monitor is useful. It gives you an accurate gauge, but again, the battery monitor and the larger wheels aren't essential. And after that, you've got other options open to you. I mean, you can do the dual push-pull configuration if that's what you want to do. You can remove the casing and expose the battery, so you can do off-board charging or carry two battery packs. And you can even do silly stuff like fit a tile Bluetooth tracker and track the board from your phone. Anyway, that brings the series of modifications for a Chinese clone longboard to an end. And until next time, bye for now.